Charlie, I think you're muted.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Ivan. So I was just going to say, we can tell that this is super live because we're having some technical challenges. Mel will join us shortly. But thanks to everyone who's tuning in to watch the webinar. It's a very, very exciting topic, democratizing car AI. My name is Charlie Lippeth. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Cinema. And I'd like to introduce our speakers. First off, Andre, maybe you can say something about yourself and how you interface with AI.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Cinema team, for having me here. It's a pleasure. My name is Andrei Ordake. I represent Here Technologies. Our company is location intelligence company making mapping and software, and now mapping and software for navigation and ADAS. But in the recent times, more and more interfacing with AI and AI agents. And I think we will be discussing this at length into our keynotes. But we're seeing that not just the humans are users of location intelligence. More and more, let's say, experiences, more and more capabilities or services are actually built on AI that's interacting with location intelligence. So from this perspective, we are especially on everything that has to do with transportation and movement, everything that moves into the real world as physical AI, or everything that plans trips into the real world, kind of like requires the location intelligence. So this is where in the recent times ourselves, we started actually very close with companies that operate in this space, to provide experiences and capabilities for users and vehicles that are built on the latest AI advancements.
Yeah, you really have your finger on the pulse there with what's happening in AI and automotive. Over to Ivan.
Thank you, Charlie. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Ivan Dimkovic, and I'm the co-founder of the company Cinema GmbH. So we specialized in in-vehicle multimedia. So we're here for a long time, since the end of 2008. So we've seen the evolution from simple CD audio, Bluetooth audio, all the way to connected services, cloud-based streaming. And of course, now with AI, what we want to do is to make the content discovery and productivity much better. So now that we have the agents, that we have the very, very good large language models, these things can actually help people discover the content. They can, instead of being a technical person to configure the multi-screen playback or accessing the right channel, this is everything that can be anticipated in advance and personalized to really fit your experience for that perfect journey on the right time, with the right emotions, in the right mood. And we are all very happy that this is happening right now, also with the latest and greatest SoCs that can finally drive all of these features forward. So I'm also happy to have everybody on this call as well.
Thank you, Ivan. And I think in our topic, we're really touching on what the key challenge really is, and that we're seeing, and that is, I mean, AI is moving at an incredibly rapid pace. I mean, today's AI breaking news is old by end of business, right? At the same time, we're in automotive. Automotive tends to work along different timelines, right? The clock just ticks differently for automotive. So there is a huge challenge, right? You have this discrepancy between hardware in cars on the road, and then AI functionalities, AI features, what consumers are expecting from AI, what they're accustomed to when they engage with AI on other devices. So yeah, we really need to figure out as an industry how to bridge the gap. And Andre, you already touched on this, and you have your pulse on a lot of things happening around AI, and given that what's unique about the car as a device is the contextual aspect, right? The car is always in a specific location. The car is going to another specific location. So how do you see maps and location data evolving from being something that just tells the driver where he or she is and where they're heading to and how long it will take, to actually being a core input for AI systems in the car?
Very good question, Charlie. And if we think about it historically, the maps have been used by human for navigation as navigation tools. If it was a paper map or a digital map, you would use it to take it from A to B. But in the recent time, they are becoming machine readable, kind of like knowledge and intelligence layers, feeding kind of like the AI algorithms that are powering either the navigation systems or the digital cockpit or even, let's say, automated driving. And what they're bringing, think about the let's say providing like a structured context, things that have to do with what's ahead of you, road geometry, lanes, rules of the road that might not be perceivable directly either by human eyes or by cameras, but also semantics and certain things that what we call knowledge graphs. This is probably the most interesting use case in AI. Is not just, let's say, find me the charging station, but know that how this actually ties to the other things that happens around you at that location. And then being able to reason and create an experience that's not just, okay, I took you to point B, but also trying to understand what could happen, what could we do proactively around it, how could this be optimized, and so on. So in a way, the maps are now kind of like acting as a persistent memory of the road network of the physical world, complementing either real-time perception or real-time algorithms in the vehicle. And for us, we're seeing, especially, and I'm talking about mobility, right? A sort of a living digital infrastructure that is continuously updated and designed both to serve the humans, which still does, but I think more and more increasing the AI systems.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think the concept of the knowledge graph and having memories of what has been done is really enabling a lot of new use cases. What do you think, Ivan, from an entertainment perspective? How do we bridge the gap from this knowledge graph that's coming from navigation to what users might actually expect when it comes to in-car entertainment?
So yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm not an AI. So basically, what we rolled out at CES is a product called ICO Media Mind, and the Media Mind is the intelligent engine for discovering content. And because it's based on LLMs and on AI, in addition to offline databases, it can actually use this context. So the more personalized data we can provide in this memory, the better content resolution will be from the end user. Of course, the trick here is because the context can grow a lot, selecting the right parts of this knowledge graph, putting it, compressing the context, making sure that the right agents get the right data, which is also the things we're all working on. But at the end of the day, the car learns with the user, and these results become better over time. So I think it's a great example. You're going to a certain location. This location has additional contextual data, and maybe what you want to, maybe show to your kids or to entertain somebody else in a car should be different depending on where you're going. So all this data helps, and we are very happy to work with our partners to integrate this data in the recommendation engine.
We maybe if I can build on this very quickly, I won't go into this, but also ourselves, we've been building some experiences and also showing at CES, but also in the China Motor Show, where let's assume that you have a vehicle that has automated driving capabilities, and you will know where are the stages that maybe you are allowed to do hands-free and eyes-free. And we thought, okay, actually, in these areas, depending on, you might anticipate, okay, for 30 minutes, you don't need to pay attention at all. Then if you can combine it with infotainment, you could say, hey, actually, maybe there's time to see your favorite whatever movie, or just play a quick game, or whatever, listen to a podcast. So I think there's let's say endless opportunities between kind of like knowing no anticipating what's going to happen, and then coming up with experiences that are safe and entertaining while you're still in the car.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings us also into the topic of orchestration and ensuring that agents are aware of each other, are learning from each other. How do you see that evolving, Ivan? Do you still see like a gap between what the capabilities are today and the in-car experience, and is there a need to bridge that gap?
I think there are two aspects to this story. One is let's say, what do you do in the cloud and what do you do on device, on the edge, right? And this also ties into privacy and regulatory frameworks, and also the behaviors and expectations of the user. So in some regions, people are quite sensitive of what data goes where, and there might not be willing, or they might not be happy with something really personal going to all kinds of third-party services. So we have to take this into account and process this data locally, pseudo-anonymize it if we send it to anywhere external. So that's one thing that needs to be worked out. The second thing, of course, is the fact that the car is not online all the time. So especially, for example, here in Germany, there are kind of not spots. If you're on a highway, you might not be offline. So if the orchestration engine is intelligent enough, and if it can anticipate, for example, from the maps, okay, we're passing the regions where, we might be having a problem, getting the right content. We can do things in advance and prepare it and pre-buffer it so the experience is uninterrupted. And the third thing is the performance. And so this, as Charlie said, this is really evolving every day as we speak. People are writing agents, people are writing MCP tools. But of course, the orchestration engine, when it deals with tens or hundreds of agents, it can become slow. So there are also problems that need to be tackled in terms of optimization, grouping those agents, caching the availability of agents. Otherwise, you might end up in a problem of, I have 200 agents and I need like 20 seconds for a response. So this is all being worked on. And the idea is to really get to the best experience for the right use case.
Yeah, the response time, performance, I mean, that's of course very critical, extremely critical when it comes to navigation, right? When you also have to know at the right time what the next move is. How are you looking at this, Andre, from an architectural perspective? What do you see happening on the edge? What do you see happening in the cloud? Where's the fine line?
Yeah, so when it comes to this, we're let's say experimenting, but most likely the most realistic things would be a bit of a hybrid architecture, with certain things that are processed on the edge and certain things that are processed on the cloud. And what I mean by this, let me give you a simple example, right? If you are using an AI agent and your query is find me the next charging station, most likely this is a pretty simple query that the information already resides in the vehicle. You can go to the navigation, let's say fire up the API, the search API, and then you'll find it, and then do routing. But for example, if you want to ask the same type of questions but slightly different, I would like to see Mona Lisa. Most likely, this type of data would not reside in the vehicle. No navigation system would have that as or at least that I'm aware of, as a POI that's kind of like saved in the vehicle. So this will have to go to the cloud. But actually, it also comes down to the practical. And, now we're talking about democratizing AI. We also have to think about the cost, right? And I think most of us were experimenting with AI, and it can become expensive, if you do this over a fleet of large vehicles to do always in the cloud. So for us, it's always also the element to try to optimize and understand, even based on the user. So if a certain user does certain queries repeatedly, you can take that data and cache it. And if there are certain things that you're trying again, sudden questions that are not, let's say, answered with the location that is cached in the vehicle, of course, would go to the cloud. So that's what the instance of the cost. The other, if you're not talking about infotainment, if you're talking about general kind of like AI and so on, it's also the element of the safety critical low latency functions. If you have like things like end-to-end AI or AI kind of like interacting with ADAS functions and immediate path planning, in this case, you have to have like milliseconds. You can't afford. So that's the other element. Although, and from our perspective, when we talk about kind of like providing maps in the vehicles, we actually do both. And certain things, can be pre-cached, certain things can stay there, certain things will be pulled from the cloud, certain things can be actually cached on the route, depending on where you are going and what's new there. So I think this orchestration is very important, both of kind of like latency functionality, but also at the end of the day, not to kind of like, have a very large bill for the OEMs to pay for use cases that are repetitive.
And maybe just to add to this, I mean, you can see it with the most popular chat applications. You can see this intelligent routing. Like if the question is easy, it gets answered immediately. But if you really ask something tricky that needs, a reasoning model or some kind of a vector database lookup, it routes it to something that consumes more tokens. And of course, this is critical when you have a large number of users.
Yeah. And again, our topic is, democratizing AI, which basically means you want to bring this functionality ideally into cars and platforms that are on the road today. So from a computational perspective, Andre, do cars of today have enough compute, and basically you can address everything that goes beyond what the car gives you in terms of CPU and RAM? You offload that into the cloud, or do you see that there's still some more work that needs to be done?
Yeah, well, I think here it depends on what the experience is. So let's say if there are cars out there, let's stay with the example of navigation, and currently you have search, but maybe you want to have kind of like Gen AI capability that can be run to the cloud and updated. That most likely, as long as you have the connectivity and this is kind of like process in the back end, could work also on hardware that's existing and kind of like I would say not I shouldn't say limited, but not necessarily made for like full AI use cases. But if it comes down to, I think, to have more complex reasonings and more complex, let's say, processes, I think that there's an element of kind of like looking at the hardware, and also the idea is also future proofing it. It's not just like, hey, we can make it now, because as you said in the beginning, with the advances in AI, you might not know that in 6 months what will happen. So I think, yeah, in this case, it's yeah, I shouldn't make a blank statement that no hardware is kind of like ready for it, but probably there's a lot more work to be done on optimizing this. And I think also if edge AI kind of like becomes a default standard in automotive, there's a lot that can be done, to optimize the models and so on to hit the sweet spot. But I think we're kind of like early days, right? I'm sure that AI will be becoming more and more efficient, both on the cloud and on the computing side. But there's work to be done from everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are definitely, iterative approaches, right, to introducing AI into the car. And of course, the more software defined the vehicle is, the more opportunities you have to add more agents to, on top of what was available at SOP. I guess the overarching concept is really, it's almost like a retrofit, right? You start with something in the car, it has some AI capabilities, maybe it's just a chatbot interface, but then step by step you try to add more. Ivan, how do you view the topic of retrofitting, and how can we bring more AI into cars that is also interesting for the consumers?
Yeah, I think, again, a great question. And this is exactly what we're exploring. I think there are multiple ways to do this. For example, in the Beijing Auto Show, you can probably, like, which happened 2 weeks ago, there are a lot of companies introducing this kind of AI boxes, right? So it's a kind of a separate silver box that you just plug it in. It needs a bit of configuration, but then all of a sudden your car, has more horsepower for AI compute. But there is another aspect to this, and that would be the consumer devices, the phones, right? What we are seeing with the latest generation of mobile phone SoCs, they are becoming more powerful. They have the tensor processing units, the NPUs. And as you know, with Apple going into device AI, Google also with their TPU chips on the phone as well. In the next couple of years, the phones will be much more powerful to run the local models. So we're also looking into extending the car infotainment with the mobile phone, using the mobile phone to offload the AI compute on it. And we're having some very successful trials with that. And this might also become a very compelling technology for the first next couple of years until the car SoCs catch up with this power as well.
Okay, yeah, that's a very interesting approach. I mean, the kind of the compute power is in your pocket, right? So why not leverage it? Of course, when it comes, to bringing smartphones into the car, yeah, it's a heated debate, right? I mean, how much should reside, what should be done on the phone, what should be done on the head unit, how are handovers handled, etc. But yeah, from a pure compute perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right, to leverage that additional horsepower that you have. And given that the development cycles of phones are different to cars, chances are you have much more power in your pocket than what's in the head unit at that given point in time. But it's still very exciting how much software companies and technology companies can kind of add post SOP, in terms of functionalities and features. And actually, I wanted to touch on the example that you mentioned, Andre, with the Mona Lisa, because that just got me thinking. Of course, it's a great query, right? Using natural language, you're looking for something. You don't know the exact address, but basically, it would be possible to infer where you need to go, right? And at the same time, we already mentioned, the car is a highly contextual device. And there are situations where there's not just a driver in the car, but there are also passengers. And that opens up additional opportunities when it comes to AI agents and what these agents can do to you, because we don't always have to be limited by driver safety. Driver safety applies to the driver, but not necessarily to the passengers. Andre, is that something that you've also looked at in terms of how
Yeah.
can you enhance, let's say, the richness of navigation for passengers compared to what you're kind of limited to showing to the driver, because you can't show videos and what have you.
Yeah, yeah, that's let's say a very interesting question. Thank you for raising that. And I think, we were kind of like contemplating. So obviously, while most of the experience in the car is tailored to the driver, the navigation could also now, you know, because through AI interfaces and kind of like duality of handling processes and doing things that are not just showing up on the screen, you could have like examples of, hey, I want to use the location information in the vehicle to have like a personalized tour, or a sort of your own personal travel guide
Mhm.
when you are going to new places. Let's assume that the father is driving next to a city, and the wife and the kids want to find out what's kind of like interesting in the city, or what would be. And you can just kind of like ask personalized questions, kind of like query, try to understand what's going to be there, if it's worth making a break, if you want to make a break, how long will it add to the overall trip, and so on. So I think for us, actually, the emergence of AI in automotive opens up actually quite a lot of possibility to extract what we call the intelligence out of the location intelligence. Because in traditional, and I want to say maybe in the way the navigation system have been created, you are, let's say, confined to, okay, I'm searching something, and then I need to
Mm.
know the address, and that's pretty much what it is. But now there's what I was talking earlier about knowledge graphs. There's so many more things that you can extract and make sense in the experiences that were not just possible through the usual interfaces. And exactly these things, can apply in very creative ways, right? Can be applied for the driver, can be applied for the passenger, can be applied maybe, as I said before, maybe even for another agent that runs parallel to the kind of like what we call the location agent, just to create something personalized, something nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ivan, obviously, multi-user, multi-screen is really in the DNA of cinema. It's something that we've been working on for many, many years, and the use cases are growing and growing. How do you see AI agents interacting with multiple passengers in the car, with multiple people in the car?
Well, it's a great thing because when you design the AI agents, you really, I mean, you should take security into the question. So the way we do it is with basically the approach of zero trust. So when the agents run, they have the least amount of privileges necessary. The security credentials are always external. They are being validated by an external tool, which then brings you an advantage because at any time you launch an agent, you basically authorize it to do job on behalf of a specific user every time, which means that the agent itself is kind of stateless in terms of the user permissions and credentials, which means that we can run it multiple times with in the context of different user. So that's not a problem. It kind of comes by design, right? Of course, the platform itself needs to be multi-user ready. The content provider needs to allow this. But
Hmm.
if those things are met, the agents themselves will be able to do that. And we solved the other problem, obviously, in our previous generation of products, as you said, Charlie. So when we had multi-screen, multi-user sharing, so these things already work. They are validated. They're already in the market. And now the agents that we are writing, they should be just working out of the box with multiple users. Now, there is another thing that needs to be solved there. And it's being solved as we speak, and that's the speech recognition system of the for example of the car has to be able to pick the individual users, like you have multiple people speaking at the
Mm.
same time. So the cloud-based ASRs today are quite capable of doing that. So they can annotate individual streams between the users. But if you use the on-device ASR, it might need to get an update in order to be able to do that, or the car OEM would need to solve it in a different way, with a wake word or something like that. Of course, I would like to avoid the wake words from the user experience point of view. Ideally, AI should know I'm talking to AI, and that's the particular user. And this is only possible with the cloud-based models.
Okay, no, very, very exciting. Yes, I mean, I'm just thinking, what's great about these use cases is, you need multiple technologies, right? So it really is kind of an ecosystem approach that you need. You need companies contributing different technology stacks to make these kinds of use cases a reality. And we're also seeing, the creation of, or the viable creation really of, real audio bubbles or entertainment bubbles inside the car, with headrest speakers advancing, where you really have the soundstage now getting more and more to the front, making this a more immersive experience. So I think this also combines really well with what you described, right? Picking up the agent picking up with who is saying what, who's asking for what, then delivering a seat specific uh, entertainment feed or knowledge feed to that seat. I mean, this is very, very exciting. Andre, how do you see, physical AI is like the next, newish buzzword. How does physical AI impact the work that you're doing, that your company is doing, and how does it augment, the navigation? If you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very topic. That's a very big topic, and something that, let's say, that we're monitoring closely and engaging as early as possible with it. And I think the way we look at it is that physical AI requires systems to perceive, reason, and act in the real world. So from this perspective, understanding the real world is kind of like key. And of course, let's say perceptions of sensors, what the vehicle sees, can do a lot of things, but there's actually more, especially when it comes to open roads or let's say road infrastructures and so on. There's additional context and additional rules. And from this perspective, you would actually require to understand the road semantics, some of the constraints, some of the, let's say, rules and regulations that might not be visible, and so on, but also likely behaviors. And this is probably the most interesting. I think many things that have to do with, let's say, the map as a kind of like complementing the sensors, as in kind of like, describing what's ahead and how to be actually to have proactive behaviors, because at the end of the day, you want a system that is able to react to the immediate proximity, but it's also able to plan for what's gonna happen, let's say, in the future beyond the sensors. And of course, this is key for an object that's moving with 100 kilometers per hour plus in automated driving. So basically, it's basically this kind of like foresight and structure and intent. We see that that's kind of like the elements that are required, or that's the benefits that location intelligence brings to physical AI in addition to the sensors. And maybe something very something kind of like new that we are seeing, kind of like we're working with companies, is not just about mapping the things that are seen in the vehicle in the real world. It's also the likely behavior. And what I mean by this is, let's assume that vehicles are driving on the road. In reality, humans are not driving like exactly following the lanes. And if you do this, we've seen with the first automated driving vehicles, it felt maybe a bit even unnatural for users and for drivers and passengers, because it felt like you were on rail and not kind of like adapting, not moving to the side of the lane, and so on. And then in the recent times, especially with more kind of like AI-based systems, we have, let's say, requirements and projects with customers to map out the user behavior, the driver behavior, and then basically provide this as an additional layer, so that for example, when would you stop in an intersection? Sometimes you're not stopping where the line is. You might be going a few meters or a few meters behind, depending on the layout and the visibility point. And these are things that may not be described by something that perception can see. Is more like trying to understand from crowdsourced data how should behave in certain situations that are not visible.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting how how these additional vectors could impact also the navigation that's proposed. I mean, I was just thinking, if you detect that it's raining, you might actually propose a different route based on some other variables, right? You might want something that's more straight, or this road is maybe prone to aquaplaning, for example. So maybe let's send the car on a more safe route. At the same time, with driver monitoring systems that are not mandatory, that might also trigger another kind of suggestion when it comes to navigation, right? Maybe you do want something that's less, straight line, always at the same speed, but something that's maybe a bit more challenging that will help keep the driver awake, for example. So yeah, this is a very interesting angle, right? That navigation is nothing static, but that it can really respond to the real world. And I think, Ivan, we've also been looking at how entertainment, infotainment can also respond, to the real world, both outside of the car and inside of the car. What are your thoughts around that?
Yes, well, absolutely. So that's again going back to the question of context and hyper personalization. So the cars are becoming fully equipped with all kinds of sensors, internal and external. So just to give you an example, today it's mandated to have the driver monitoring system in a car. Well, it can be pretty basic, checking if you're drowsy or something like that. But even the more advanced one are the cabin monitoring sensors that can have cameras with AI models on them. They can detect, the emotional state of the people inside, the number of people. So just a silly example is like, okay, I have more than one person in a car. Maybe I don't want to read my confidential emails because of that. Or if there is a different like age group, if there is a kid in the back, maybe we don't want to show all kinds of age inappropriate content. So all these little things make life a bit easier for the end user, and they're just utilizing all this data. Or for example, the external cameras, we can pick up you're in a traffic jam or there is a really bad weather condition. We can adapt the mood and the music type in the car to make you more calm down. So this is all coming, and I think the key thing here is just thinking of the use cases that matter, that actually make sense and make the life easier for the people inside.
Yeah, and I think it also shows again how collaboration is really important. I mean, there are to create this full in-car experience. Yeah, different technologies just need to come together, right? And they need to work together. And from that perspective, Andre, what is it? Say your recommendation to OEMs when it comes to the sensitive topic of collaboration, opening up. How like at what level should car companies really work together as an industry to make certain use cases better, safer, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's a very good question, and maybe kind of like referring to kind of like the original concept. I think that at the end of the day, probably the experiences of the future would not be just kind of like one AI agent, but a combination of kind of like an agentic system with certain things done by the OEMs, certain things kind of like building blocks from the industry. And we've seen it's interesting, right? We're not there yet at AI, but we've seen it already come like when it comes to infotainment and digital cockpit without the AI complexity. OEMs that come like wanted to do everything on their own, probably they realize that the software complexity just gets bigger, and probably it makes sense to focus on the 20% differentiation and then work with like building blocks that are able to customize and so on. That's probably what provides kind of like the best experience, instead of kind of like trying to build up components that are kind of like individual that are invisible to the driver. And at the end of the day, I would say, as AI and kind of like agentic systems are a topic that's even more complex, I would say, uh, probably the same, it will follow the same pattern, right? So definitely OEMs have to be at the forefront. They have to own the experience, they have to come like they understand the users and so on. But the way they get to this experience, they don't need to build it alone, and probably they will get a better outcome by working with, let's say, the partners that have proven points and they bring strong expertise with the building blocks that they provide, and then make them fit together. And we also see that, I think, if in the past was some of this collaboration was a bit hampered by having like physical prototypes and so on. I think in this new world, this is less of a challenge now. You can come like mix and match components, test it, see them how they run on your SoC way before you even have an SoC. And then come like make it work, and then focus as an OEM on the differentiation, because that's what actually matters for the users.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And in addition, I mean, for a lot of these, let's say, more advanced use cases that you want to offer to the customers, you're relying on technology and services that's coming from third parties, and of course, it's going to be really hard for third parties to adapt and accommodate closed systems, right? I mean, they also want to scale, so having this building block approach and having an orchestration layer, having certain rules how different modules communicate with each other is really mission critical in order to release products to market. How do you view this, Ivan?
Yeah, I think what makes this really a great topic is the fact that the large language models are becoming much more intelligent and powerful. So the things like the differences in APIs, the schemas, and all the things you had to do manually as a developer in the past, they can be completely solved by an LLM itself. So that means that if we introduce new MCP tools, like for example a new version of the service, I don't think you actually need to do almost anything. I mean, yeah, of course you need to test it, but the LLM will probably figure out the differences with the tool calling, what's different and how to adapt, which makes this bridging the ecosystems between the different components much more easier than before. Of course, the content providers, the platform providers, they also have to jump on that bandwagon, because the traditional model in the past was individual app, which is kind of completely vertical and closed. But I think the benefits for the end users are immense. So if I have to, if I have multiple agents and tools from different content sources, and I can just ask my assistant to organize the data or to do something with the content, and it will do that as long as it has access to the right tooling, I think me as a user, I would really much appreciate that than having to use individual apps. So I think this is all coming along. It might not come with the same speed with different types of content, but the end user push coming from the mobile phone side, coming from the PC computer side is huge. So I think this will happen in the automotive industry. Of course, the task here is to make sure that this is safe and private, because this data flying around between different endpoints and different places in the world, this of course has to be controlled. And there is also this question of security here. You all heard about prompt injection attacks, people exfiltrating data with crafting a very smart message embedded in a PNG file somewhere in the document. So this is a serious question which needs a lot of data sanitization. But I would say, okay, these are the engineering challenges that need to be overcome with the right best practices. But ultimately, I think we're going to see taking down of these individual silos, and you having access to all your data through AI in a much easier way than before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is in many ways, comparable to, the, let's say the PC industry, the smartphone industry, in that, sure, the type of PC and smartphone that you use also says something, it's a form of expression, if the brand is really built, a very strong brand. And then there are some, there's differentiation in terms of certain, capabilities, think of different cameras, for example, in smartphones, etc. But when it comes to digital lifestyle as a consumer, you don't want to be limited by the device as such, right? You have your services, your way of doing things, your kind of wish list of how you'd like to be assisted throughout the day, and that should not be in any way negatively impacted by the device. So I think there really is this pressure coming from the market to ensure that there's at least a baseline, right, of AI functionality across all of the cars, right, in the market. And maybe to jump on to continue that line of thought, Andre, what for you as a consumer, what would be the ideal in-car AI experience for you?
Well, for me, and let's say I would say for me, but I also maybe make some references to at least what we learned in these early years of let's say working with AI. And the
Yes.
vehicle itself, it at the core of it is a transportation mean, right? So we know it from let's say from partners that we work with, from OEMs. The vast majority of their kind of like AI queries today, they have to do with, like, let's say, trip planning and get me to places and so on. So for me, I think there are two parts of it, right? And I'll maybe, let's say, take it in these two steps. So if I'm still driving the vehicle, or at least I bear the responsibility for what happens in the vehicle,
Hmm.
I would like an experience that just makes it easy, and makes me easy to find the place, go to the place on my trip, just be aware of the main things and avoid dangers, and get me quickest and safest to my destination. Even if
Hmm.
I even if I don't know exactly where my destination is, even if I have an intent, take that intent and plan the trip for me. That's one part of it. Now, the second part is, if I'm not driving the vehicle, or at least partially I'm handing over the control to the driver, and then I can make use of this time in different ways, then the experience become, or let's say, then my wish list as a consumer becomes even more extensive than that. So of course everything that I said before applies, but now I want to
Hmm.
make sure that I either I'm making most of the time of the I'm making most of my non-driving time, meaning that I learn about where I'm going, or maybe I get experience, or maybe I'm catching up on things, maybe I'm doing things that, while the car is still kind of like a private space, kind of like catching up on work, or catching up on email, or doing productive things from the car. So to summarize, I think this would be my two, I would say, wish list, but in two steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense. I mean, that is really the order, right? At the end of the day, we should never forget what the car is there for and what the main purpose is. But of course, there are so many situations where the car ends up being more than just this device taking you from A to B. Ivan, from your end, what's your dream AI in car experience?
I think it's a general AI experience in total. Like, well, first of
Hmm.
all, I would like it to really have access to my data and being personalized to me. So not asking questions if it doesn't have to ask, of course. But I think even more important, and I think this is going to be a nice question for the embedded AI as well, is the hallucinations. So as we all know, with the current AI, it is very confident in giving answers, even though sometimes those
Hmm.
answers make no sense. This is all fun and games when we're talking about, a simple chat assistant for, chit chat or whatever. But if we're dealing with a real situation, like where you need help with your vehicle, right? This is the serious part. Like, I wouldn't like it to tell me that the button is in the wrong place if I really need this button in the next few seconds. So that's something, it needs to be worked on still. And that's, when you do a POC, it's making a POC is always easy. You make a demo with a happy path, and that's great. But then you give it to a wide number of users with all kinds of different accents, different ways of phrasing things. That's where the things start showing up. So I think there is still way to go to make this really reliable, because we are humans. Like, if the AI works 9 out of 10 times, but we will remember that 10th time that it didn't work. So this really needs to be taken care of. But if this is taken care of and it's hyper personal, has access to data I want, and it's secure, I would be a daily user.
Yeah, maybe I can build on what you said, and I think this is interesting, especially the hallucination. I think that's a given, and I'm not saying that AI is moving very fast. So the things that I've experienced in the beginning, I'm sure that there are other things, but we were, in the early days of LLMs, we were kind of like trying to plan trips or holidays with the help of LLMs, and lots of things, they're kind of like made up places, made up things, and so on. Of course, this could come from various reasons, but also kind of like at the core of it, it requires kind of like validated data, and basically what kind of data you have and so on. So at the end of the day, you can't kind of like fully, let's say, look only at the LLM, and kind of like we also have to look at the data sets that go into it and make sure that they are, they're providing the solid foundation for these experiences to be created. Otherwise, an LLM will tend to make a good answer if it doesn't find a good answer.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, actually, I have a very recent experience from yesterday with, let's say, a state of the art AI, a really, really state of the art. And we were just trying to organize some trips in Germany. And I was needing to go to the Frankfurt airport, and I said, "Look, I'm in Karlsruhe. I need to be there at that and that time. Tell me what is the latest time I need to go." And it gave me time in the past, and I said, "Okay, what time is it right now? It's 3:50, and you recommend me to go when? Oh, 3:30. Okay, so how do I do that?" And you just go at 3:30. And I'm like, okay, so this really still needs some work but
Yeah.
these are these little things that are actually important in the real life situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there again shows, how the car is really a unique device. We should not be fooled into believing that a car is a smartphone on wheels. It's much more than that. And as you said, bad hallucinations inside a car can be problematic, more problematic than a smartphone. But I think overall we can say that the future is very promising. A lot of exciting companies are working on bringing more and more AI functionality into the car. There is no need to reinvent the vehicle per se. There's a lot that can be done with what's already available today in terms of architectures, given that we can take this hybrid approach of having some things on the edge, others in the cloud, and maybe even offloading to smartphones, for example, right, to do a real kind of retrofit. So yeah, very exciting to be in this industry at this point in time. I want to thank you both for your time today, for your insights. It was a really interesting conversation. And to all of the listeners and watchers, there'll be QR code displayed where you can reach out to us. And of course, you can reach out directly to the speakers. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.